Hello and welcome to today's in-depth special report on the topic China's CCP holds a major policy meeting as US trade tensions rise. In this video we are going to explore not just what is happening between China and the United States but also how these global shifts are influencing the rest of the world, especially in Africa and the United States itself. This story is not just about politics and economics, it is about how power is shifting in the 21st century and how different regions are trying to adapt to the changing balance of global influence. So stay tuned as we take you through the key developments in China, Africa and the United States and what they mean for the future of global relations. We begin with China, where the Chinese Communist Party has just concluded one of its most important policy meetings of the year. The CCP Central Committee met in Beijing to discuss the nation's economic strategy, social stability and foreign policy direction amid growing international pressure and internal challenges. The meeting comes at a time when China's economy is slowing down after years of rapid growth and when trade and technology tensions with the United States are intensifying once again. Inside the closed-door meeting, top Chinese leaders reportedly discussed how to stabilize the property market, which has been facing a serious downturn. Several major real estate developers have struggled to pay their debts, causing ripples across the global financial system. The CCP is now trying to boost confidence among investors and ordinary citizens. At the same time, the leadership is pushing forward its Made in China 2025 plan, aiming to dominate advanced sectors like semiconductors, electric vehicles and green energy. But what makes this meeting especially significant is its timing. The United States has recently announced new restrictions on Chinese technology exports, particularly in the field of artificial intelligence and chip manufacturing. Washington argues that these restrictions are necessary for national security, but Beijing sees them as an attempt to contain its rise. The CCP leadership has called on the nation to strengthen self-reliance in science and technology and to accelerate innovation to reduce dependency on the West. Chinese state media has emphasized the idea of resilience and unity under President Xi Jinping's leadership. The message is clear. The party wants to show that despite external pressures and internal economic difficulties, China will not change its political model. It will continue to pursue what Xi Jinping calls Chinese-style modernization. That means a strong state-guided economy, tight political control and an emphasis on long-term strategic planning rather than short-term profits. However, behind the confident public statements there are concerns. Unemployment among young people remains high and consumer confidence is weak. Many local governments are under heavy debt pressure. The property sector, which once drove much of China's growth, is now a source of instability. In response, the CCP has hinted at new stimulus measures, including infrastructure spending and tax breaks for small businesses. But economists are divided about whether these steps will be enough to restore growth. At the same time, the party is paying close attention to social stability. In recent months there have been small protests over unpaid wages and delayed housing projects. The leadership fears that economic hardship could translate into political discontent. Therefore, the message from this policy meeting was not only about the economy but also about maintaining control. The CCP is emphasizing ideological discipline and loyalty to the party line. Meanwhile, the global context is becoming more complex. The United States under the Biden administration has been strengthening its alliances in the Asia-Pacific region. Washington has deepened cooperation with Japan, South Korea and the Philippines. It has also continued to support Taiwan despite Beijing's warnings. These moves are seen by China as part of a broader strategy of containment. In response, Beijing is reaching out to countries in Africa, the Middle East and Latin America, offering investment and trade opportunities through initiatives like the Belt and Road. And that brings us to Africa, which has become one of the most important theaters of China's global engagement. Over the last 2 decades, Chinese investment in Africa has transformed infrastructure across the continent. Roads, railways, ports and power plants have been built with Chinese loans and expertise. Many African governments see China as a reliable partner that does not attach political conditions to its aid. However, in recent years there has been growing debate about the sustainability of this relationship. As China's own economy slows down, some African countries are struggling to repay loans. Critics argue that Beijing's lending practices have created a new form of economic dependency, sometimes referred to as debt trap diplomacy. But supporters point out that Chinese-financed projects have filled critical infrastructure gaps that Western countries long ignored. The truth lies somewhere in between. China has clearly become Africa's largest trading partner, but the balance of power in this relationship remains uneven. In recent months there has been a shift in tone. African leaders are calling for more balanced partnerships where local industries benefit and where projects lead to jobs and skills transfer rather than simply resource extraction. Some countries such as Kenya and Nigeria are renegotiating the terms of Chinese loans, while others like Ethiopia and Tanzania continue to welcome Chinese investment in industrial parks and energy projects. Meanwhile, the United States is trying to reassert its influence in Africa as well. Washington has launched several new initiatives focused on clean energy, digital transformation, and democratic governance. The U.S. sees Africa not just as a continent of humanitarian concern but as a key partner in global trade and strategic competition. American officials have repeatedly warned that countries should be careful about becoming too dependent on Chinese financing. In this sense, Africa is becoming a major stage for the rivalry between China and the United States. Both powers are competing for markets, resources, and diplomatic support. African nations are aware of this and are using it to their advantage by balancing relations with both sides. For example, while some African countries welcome American investment in renewable energy, they also continue to buy Chinese-made technology and machinery. Now let's turn to the United States itself, where economic and political pressures are shaping Washington's approach to China. The American economy has shown resilience in the face of global uncertainty, but inflation and high interest rates continue to weigh on households. The Biden administration has made it clear that it will not return to the era of free trade with China. Instead, it is pursuing what officials call de-risking, that means reducing dependence on Chinese supply chains without completely decoupling from them. To achieve this, the U.S. government is encouraging domestic manufacturing through subsidies and tax incentives, especially in key sectors like semiconductors, electric vehicles, and clean energy. The Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS and Science Act are part of this broader strategy. They aim to rebuild America's industrial base while also competing with China in the technologies of the future. At the same time, trade tensions are spilling into diplomacy. American companies are facing pressure to rethink their operations in China. Some have begun shifting production to other Asian countries such as Vietnam and India. However, these changes are not easy or cheap. China still remains the world's largest manufacturing hub with an unmatched infrastructure network and skilled labor force. The political climate in Washington is also influencing policy. With the 2024 elections behind and new debates heating up for the next political cycle, both major parties agree on one thing: the need to take a tough stance on China. Republicans and Democrats may disagree on many domestic issues, but when it comes to Beijing, there is bipartisan consensus that the United States must protect its technological and strategic edge. Beyond trade and technology, there is also a military dimension. The United States has increased its naval presence in the South China Sea and continues to conduct freedom of navigation operations to challenge Chinese territorial claims. Beijing has responded with military drills near Taiwan. This tit-for-tat dynamic has raised fears of miscalculation or accidental conflict. Meanwhile, American businesses are feeling the pressure of global uncertainty. Tech companies face restrictions on selling high-end chips to China. Agricultural exporters are concerned about potential retaliatory tariffs. Consumers are paying more for imported goods as supply chains adjust. These challenges are creating a complex environment where economic interests and national security concerns are deeply intertwined. Back in China, the CCP's policy meeting also addressed these global risks. Leaders discussed ways to strengthen the domestic market and to diversify exports to regions like Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The phrase dual circulation was once again emphasized, which means relying more on domestic consumption while still maintaining strong trade links abroad. It is a strategy designed to make China more resilient to external shocks, including those caused by American sanctions. Yet the relationship between the two powers is not entirely hostile. Despite their rivalry, both countries remain economically interconnected. Bilateral trade still exceeds $600 billion annually. American companies like Apple, Tesla, and Boeing continue to operate in China, while Chinese firms like BYD and Lenovo have significant market presence in the United States. This mutual dependence acts as a brake on full-scale confrontation, though tensions remain high. When we look at Africa in this broader context, it becomes clear that the continent's future will be shaped in part by how this US-China competition evolves. If tensions continue to rise, African nations may face tough choices about where to align their economic and political interests. But if both powers find a way to coexist and cooperate, Africa could benefit from diversified investments and technology transfer from both sides. There is also a human dimension to this story. Millions of young Africans are entering the job market every year. They need opportunities in manufacturing, technology, and services. Whether these jobs come from Chinese factories, American companies, or homegrown startups will depend on the global economic environment. Education and digital skills are becoming central to this transformation, and many African countries are investing in technology training programs, often with support from international partners. At the same time, environmental issues are rising in importance. Both China and the United States have made commitments to reduce carbon emissions, though their progress and methods differ. Africa, which contributes the least to global emissions, is among the most vulnerable to climate change. Droughts, floods, and rising temperatures are already affecting agriculture and livelihoods. This creates another area where global cooperation is essential. If China and the US can find common ground on climate action, Africa could play a key role in renewable energy development and green supply chains. Now, if we compare China, Africa, and the United States, we can see three different but interconnected realities. China is a manufacturing giant trying to manage its slowdown while maintaining global influence. The United States is a technological and financial powerhouse seeking to protect its leadership through innovation and alliances. Africa is a young and rapidly growing continent striving to find its place between these powers. Each region faces its own challenges, but their futures are increasingly linked. For China, the challenge is balancing control with openness. The CCP's tight political system allows for long-term planning, but it can also stifle innovation and private initiative. For the United States, the challenge is balancing competition with cooperation. Overly aggressive policies could damage global supply chains and increase costs for consumers. And for Africa, the challenge is ensuring that foreign partnerships truly benefit local populations and do not lead to new forms of dependency. In the next few years, we can expect the global landscape to keep shifting. The US and China will continue to compete in areas like artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and digital infrastructure. Africa will continue to attract attention as a key market and resource hub. Multilateral institutions like the United Nations and the World Bank will need to adapt to these new dynamics. Ultimately, the outcome will depend on how well each region manages its internal problems. For China, success will depend on whether it can stimulate domestic demand and maintain political stability. For the United States, it will depend on whether it can rebuild trust in its institutions and invest effectively in innovation. And for Africa, it will depend on whether governments can strengthen governance, create jobs, and harness the potential of their young populations. As we close this report, one thing is clear. The CCP's major policy meeting is not just a domestic Chinese event. It is part of a much larger story about the future of global power. The trade tensions between China and the United States are not just about tariffs or chips, they are about who will shape the world's next economic order. And Africa stands as both an observer and a participant in this unfolding drama. In the end, cooperation may prove more beneficial than confrontation. The world's challenges, from climate change to pandemics to economic inequality, cannot be solved by any one nation alone. The question is whether the major powers can look beyond rivalry and find areas of mutual interest. History shows that competition can drive progress, but only if it remains peaceful and productive. So as China's leaders emerge from their policy meeting and as Washington debates its next move, the rest of the world, including Africa, watches closely. The choices made in Beijing and Washington will influence not only their own futures but the lives of billions around the globe. The hope is that those choices will lead towards stability, prosperity, and shared progress rather than division and conflict. Thank you for watching this special report on China's CCP policy meeting and the rising US trade tensions. If you found this analysis useful, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dive coverage of global affairs. Stay tuned for our next video, where we will continue to bring you insights on how these major powers shape the future of our interconnected world.